Greetings, I'm Karen Colligan, and welcome to the Let's Talk Leadership podcast. So why do I care about leadership? As a founder of PeopleThink, and in my tenure as a leader, as a consultant, and as a coach, I've certainly seen my share of very good leaders and my share of very bad leaders. And I thought it'd be great to share the wisdom from the very good leaders. Hence, the Let's Talk Leadership podcast. You're going to hear from a variety of leaders who are in a variety of roles, sharing their leadership expertise by answering the same 6 questions. Every single leader is unique in their style and approach, and we want to capture that uniqueness and provide you, the listener, with a diverse way of looking at leadership. So let's get moving and talk to our next leadership guest. In this episode, I am thrilled to be speaking to Suhaiba Neill, founder of the Full Circle Business. We're going to hear all about Suhaiba's approach to leadership. Suhaiba, welcome, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, and it's always fun to talk to another East Coast native.
Nothing like it. Absolutely. So, Suhaiba, tell us a little bit about who you are and give us a snapshot of your role as the founder of the Full Circle Business before we even start this leadership conversation.
Right. So I would say now I am an entrepreneur. And a girlfriend of mine told me I have dual careers now with the consulting business and my primary job, which is managing our family painting business. So the painting business here in the suburbs of Philadelphia, in our 49th year, actually, which is exciting, which my dad founded and my brother and I are both involved in now, moving into second generation. And then 2020, a fun year to start a business. I decided to launch my consulting business to help fellow contractors with systems, processes, and organizations, because I discovered that was my gift and my sweet spot. And some fellow business owners encouraged me to share that with the rest of the world. So that's where the Full Circle Business came in.
Wow, that's fascinating. So let me just ask you from a consulting perspective, and we'll get into it a little bit later. Is it mostly for family-run businesses? Is it small entrepreneur organizations, a combo of the two?
So it's interesting. Originally, I started with painting contractors because that's what I know really, really well. And that's what I've done for 20 years. And then I realized that contracting in general is pretty much the same foundation. So I expanded from there. Then I realized business owners in general need help with systems and processes. And a current client I'm working with, actually, he grew up in a family painting business. Now he runs a marketing company. So we're working together on getting his systems and processes organized. And one of my goals now, and I think part of our conversation, which will come up in a little bit, was the focus on the leadership and wanting to help empower as many women as possible. So I am taking my mother's advice and staying open to the opportunities. And I think what I've discovered, again, like I said, my brain just works like, if you give me a problem, I'm going to find a suggestion or a solution. So I'm good with pretty much any system or process issue you may have. And I'm definitely willing to explore opportunities and branch out of, my comfort zone, which is how you grow.
Yes, absolutely. And isn't it amazing how our moms have so much wisdom? Growing up, we might not have thought so. However, we recognize, they might know a thing or two, those darn moms of ours.
Yes.
Okay.
I've been a good listener, though, over the years.
Good for you. Something about leadership, that's for sure. Got to be a good listener. All right. Thanks so much. Love that. Okay. So we're going to get right into our leadership conversation. So naturally, the first question is the definition of leadership, which is a joke, because this is my 4th episode of Let's Talk Leadership. And there's not been one leader who has said the same thing about leadership. So let's hear, how do you describe leadership?
It's interesting, too, because when I first started thinking about this question, I realized my original definition of leadership was a little bit off. So growing up, I thought leader had to be this kind of like go get 'em, guns blazing, high energy, dominant style person. And then probably about a decade ago, I heard a speaker, and it kind of had a light bulb moment go off for me, because I didn't think of myself as a natural born leader. I'm an introvert. I'm kind of quiet, the only girl with 3 brothers. So that's a whole nother can of worms in that mix. And so what I realize is now my definition of leadership, I think a really good leader is a helper. And you're
Mm,
helping your organization, you're helping your team, you're helping employees learn and grow and kind of achieve their goals as well. So for me, and that's actually my favorite thing to be is helpful. So
mm.
when it comes to leadership, that's my approach is how can I be as helpful as possible to the business, to the team, to the customers, to the vendors, and just have that win-win. I always say I like all relationships to be a good fit both ways. So
Mhm.
it shouldn't just be about one or the other. It should be for both of us. This is, a good fit. And how
Yeah.
can I help make that possible?
Yeah, and I love what you're saying in terms of you said the business, the team, the employees, the customers, and the vendors. Because
Yep.
when we start thinking about leadership, it isn't always just about the organization. There's so much more that goes around that. And to put your leadership hat on and really start thinking about, well, wait a minute, it's really the enterprise,
Yep.
not just one piece of it. Yeah.
And
So that
that's actually where the name for my business kind of derived. The full circle business is I realized that we always think kind of in a linear way.
yes.
And it's really a circle and everything's connected. And if not everybody's on the same team and realizing how important their piece of the pie is as you're working your way around that circle, you don't really end up with that great experience for the employee or the customer or, like I said, those good vendor relationships as well. So that's where that whole idea came from for me was we're in a circle and it's just kind of cyclical and it's seasonal in our industry, and it just kind of goes around and starts over again. So the better you are dialed in my world, the customer circle has 8 stops. So if you hit all 8 of them, then you've done a great job and you've delivered a great experience. If you miss one, it could result in all kinds of things nowadays with the internet and social media and reviews that you
Just
don't want to have to defend.
exactly, exactly right. And what you talk about with the full circle and what you're saying from a consulting perspective is you're really talking about systems and processes. If
Right.
all those systems and processes are not in sync, then something's going to fail and there's going to be a break in that circle. And when there's a break in the circle, then there's a stop. And
Right.
that's not good for any business, certainly. All righty then. So my second question is, I'm really big on understanding leaders' values because for me, I feel like the values are really the foundation. They're the guiding light for how a person can make decisions. And so the good decisions, and let's not forget those really complicated decisions. And for me, values help us sleep at night for the good decisions and the really hard decisions. So my question to you is, as a leader, what are your top three values?
So I tease it. I read Eat, Pray, Love years ago, and she talks about having one word, and I'm like, well, I need two. So I have 2 words that I kind of define myself by. One is authenticity. I think that for me, I want to be me every time I show up, and I want to be authentic with people. I think we all have bad days, but for the most part, I want to be real. Number 2 is kind of humility. I think sometimes when you get into a leadership role, if you kind of, your cheeks get a little too puffy and you forget that you don't know everything and you don't have all the answers and we're all human. So for me, maintaining a level of humility is important as well. I think it helps you stay open as well to ideas and suggestions from team members. And the third one, and actually I had to think about this for a little bit, but then it goes in line with what I do in the consulting world, is consistency. I
Mhm.
think if you have that leadership mentality, and I think, like you said, I have heard a couple of speakers over the past year that helped change my mindset on my being kind of a natural born leader and the way that I operate. I just do it quietly. Um, but I think not everybody has that mentality and mindset. And for your employees who may not be natural born leaders, there's a lot of sometimes fear around security and stability and the consistency. So as a leader, I think if you can be consistent and you can be authentic, it goes a long way in making people feel more comfortable and more secure in their jobs and more apt to being open to do the same with you as well.
Right. And you mentioned something about natural born leaders. And, if you look at the world around us, some are and some aren't. What I love about leadership is it's a set of competencies and that people really can learn those competencies in order to be a leader. So you had indicated earlier, you're an introvert, you might not be as out there as some of the extroverted leaders. And I truly believe introverted leaders are as important as extrovert leaders. I mean, Susan Cain wrote the book, The Quiet Leader, and it's not about how big you are. It's really about what's your content behind you. And you just use the word of consistency. So if your team members, your vendors, your customers know you're going to be consistent, then they know who's going to show up. And
Right.
is really, really important from a leadership perspective. You don't want to Jekyll and Hyde. You don't, and we all we all have bad days. Who doesn't have a bad day? However, there needs to be consistency in the messaging, in the way that you operate, in your behavior, in your attitude, and how you work. Yeah, love that. All right. So, what is the best advice you ever were given by a leader?
That was another one that was a little bit of a thought process for me. And I think we touched on this a little bit in the beginning about moms. And so I have a very
Mhm.
strong, confident, determined mother, which is a good thing. And we knew what the rules, and you talk about, values and core values. And when I get into that with my clients, sometimes people glaze over the importance of core values. And I'm like, think about raising kids and those non-negotiables. You need the same thing in your business, and you've got to be willing to stick with them.
Yeah.
But so for her, it wasn't so much a piece of advice. I think it was a mindset
Mm.
and a kind of something she mirrored for all of us with regards to dreaming big and going after the dream. So she always encouraged us to, like I said, if there's something that you're interested in, that you want to do, that you want to pursue, go for it. But she always said, what do we need to do to make it happen? And for me, that we has made all the difference over the years. And I realize now as an adult, I did 80, 90% of the legwork, but knowing